A Frenchman on a bicycle was stopped by an Italian guard at the border. The Frenchman carried a large bag. "What's in the bag?" asked the guard. "Sand," the Frenchman replied. The guard verified it was sand and motioned the Frenchman through. This occurred every week for 6 months, until one day the Frenchman failed to appear. A few days later, the guard saw the cyclist in the town square. The guard said, "We knew you were smuggling something, but we couldn't figure out what." And the Frenchman turned to the guard, winked, and said, "Bicycles." In this video, we will take the concept of how trade promotes specialization and apply it to the larger context of trade between countries. We'll show that under natural assumptions, entire countries of people will not all specialize in production of the same good. In previous episodes, we introduced the concept of trade, looked at what a production possibilities frontier can tell us about internal prices people face in production of two goods, beer and cheese, and we talked about how a trader can make profits by buying a good from the relatively low-cost producer, the producer with the comparative advantage, and selling that good to the relatively high-cost producer. The act of buying and selling by the trader causes people to specialize in production of the good in which they have a comparative advantage. We even introduced the big idea that a trader is a metaphor for the invisible hand of the marketplace. We have limited our conversation to talking about two lads named Randy and Dean that have been incentivized to trade with each other by a third lad named Kenny. If you recall, Kenny observes Randy's and Dean's internal prices, and he buys low and sells high to make a profit. We learned that the process of buying low and selling high transforms Randy's and Dean's workday because their time to work is fixed, such that they specialize in producing the good in which they are the low-cost producer. That is, the good in which they have a comparative advantage in production. Notice that so far we have not mentioned anything about trade between countries. In this video, we are going to discuss how trade flows across states and nations arise naturally as the consequence of individuals in different states and nations trading with each other. We are also going to discuss scenarios where we do not expect full specialization of production to occur, which explains why entire countries of people do not all work in the same industry. Now let's imagine an entire state full of people that have similar skills as Dean and a different state full of people with skills similar to Randy. The people in the state with the skill set like Randy will trade with the people in the state with the skill set like Dean. For example, the people of Wisconsin might export beer or cheese to Minnesota while importing, say, apples from that state. Or you can imagine an entire country of people just like Randy and a different country of people just like Dean. In this case, entire countries of people will trade with each other. Remember, every trade represents deals made between individuals responding to market forces and incentives. Countries don't trade, people trade. However, what will be reported in the news are aggregate exports and imports. The country full of beer-producing Deans will report its exports of kegs of beer and imports of wedges of cheese. The country full of Randys will report its exports of cheese and imports of beer. The news media makes trade between countries sound like a large planned dance, when in reality, individual agents executing trades are just responding to market forces and doing what is in their economic best interest, given prices and incentives. One thing we should note is that trade across states or across nations does not have to lead to full specialization of employment. Depending on the shape of the production possibilities frontier, there might be no profitable trades after a certain level of specialization. The easiest way to show this is to modify the production possibilities frontiers for Randy and Dean to show that they might choose not to completely specialize. A simple table illustrates this concept. Suppose after some specialization induced by trading, Randy is now spending 3 hours brewing beer and 5 hours making cheese. And Dean is spending 5 hours brewing beer and 3 hours making cheese. In this new table, we've made Randy's productivity of cheese making decline slightly as he moves from 5 hours of cheese making to 6 hours of cheese making. The value in earlier episodes was 54. Now it is 53.51. Related, let Dean's productivity of brewing decrease slightly as well, as he moves from 5 hours of brewing to 6 hours. The value in earlier episodes was 30, and now it is 29.7. The embedded assumption in the new production possibilities frontiers for both Randy and Dean is that as the level of specialization increases, the rate at which cheese can be converted to beer changes as well. These new decreases in productivity affect Dean and Randy's internal prices. Let's introduce a formula that we can use to determine the new price of beer and cheese given the data in this table. As Randy goes from evenly splitting up his day between brewing beer and making cheese to spending 1 more hour making cheese, his cost of beer is 0.9 wedges of cheese, the same as before. As Randy further specializes, increasing his cheese production, the same formula applied to this new row of the table would be 53.51 minus 45 divided by 30 minus 20, or 8.51 divided by 10, which gives us the new price, 0.85 wedges of cheese. Analogously, to compute the price of cheese, we divide the difference in beer production by the difference in cheese production. Applying this equation yields new internal prices. In the new table, at the new levels of production for both Randy and Dean, no trades are profitable because both producers face exactly the same internal prices. In this scenario, there is no way for Kenny to buy low and sell high. After all, Dean and Randy have identical prices. So in this new example, full specialization likely will not occur. Dean will still make cheese for 2 hours, and Randy will still brew beer for 2 hours. Even when no further specialization in production is profitable, Randy will make most of the cheese that Dean consumes, and Dean will make most of the beer Randy consumes. Economists think that an entire country's production possibilities frontier will look more like the one we devised for Randy and Dean in Table 3, with decreasing marginal productivity as specialization occurs, rather than earlier tables, which were constructed assuming constant marginal productivity, even after specialization. Ultimately, if the real world is characterized by decreasing marginal productivity, then no country will completely specialize in any one activity. Why is the production possibilities frontier with decreasing marginal productivity the more likely scenario? The thought is that every individual person in an economy will specialize in one type of production or another, brewing or cheese making, if you will, but after a good deal of specialization, it will become increasingly hard to convert the remaining cheesemakers to brewers, or the remaining brewers to cheesemakers. This is because in a country, not everyone will have exactly the same skills. As more and more people convert to brewing, the remaining cheesemakers will be highly skilled at cheesemaking and relatively unskilled at brewing. Given the skills of the cheesemakers that remain, it may be unprofitable to convert them to brewers. So, some diversification in an entire economy, rather than full specialization, is a natural outcome. Let's take a minute to recap the important points of this video here. We build off the earlier concept that trade promotes specialization in production, and our understanding that trade represents deals made between individuals responding to market forces and incentives. Country trade flows are the sum of these individual trades. The new concept to remember is that specialization has its limits because, depending on the shape of an entire country's production possibilities frontier, there may be no profitable trades after a certain level of specialization in that country. The rule of thumb is that as the level of specialization inside a country increases, the profitability of additional trades between countries declines. The result is that countries of people never fully specialize in any one type of production. And what this means is that at the country level, diversification of production rather than full specialization is a natural outcome. So, even though both the French and Italians might make bicycles, Italians find it useful to pedal pedals.